The desert sun hanging over Palm Desert wasn't like the sun Rachel knew from her neighborhood across town. Here, it seemed to drape everything in liquid gold, casting a warm glow over the obscene wealth it touched. But for the catering staff, that same sun was merciless. Rachel Bennett, carefully maneuvering through the crowd with a silver tray of crystal champagne glasses, felt sweat gathering at the base of her neck despite the gentle breeze coming off the sprawling pool. She existed in their world as a shadow, present but meant to go unnoticed. Yet within minutes, a vicious act would thrust her into the spotlight, delivering a humiliation so complete she thought she'd never recover. What she couldn't know was that her response to that moment would catch the attention of someone powerful enough to rewrite not just her story, but the stories of everyone involved. The atmosphere at the Whitmore compound was saturated with privilege, a mixture of designer fragrances, perfectly manicured lawns, and the sharp chemical scent of the infinity pool. For Rachel Bennett, it was just another grueling shift. Every movement across the imported stone tiles demanded precision. Keep the tray steady. Don't meet their eyes unless they address you first. Blend into the background of your white button-down and black slacks. Rachel was 22, though exhaustion made her feel decades older. Her existence was compartmentalized. During daylight hours, she was an artist, her cramped studio filled with canvases that reeked of turpentine and possibility. Her hands, normally marked with cerulean and burnt sienna, were now scrubbed clean and gripping serving trays. At night and on weekends like this one, she transformed into hired help, pouring drinks for people whose weekend getaways cost more than her annual earnings. The money served a purpose. It paid for another semester at the local college. It bought quality brushes and paint. It brought her one step closer to her application for the Rhode Island School of Design. That dream was the only thing that made the dismissive glances and casual cruelty bearable. The celebration was in full swing. Young men with effortless tans and expensive watches clustered together, their laughter carrying over the music with absolute confidence. Women who appeared carved from porcelain reclined on lounge chairs, their designer sunglasses concealing any authentic emotion. These were the children of venture capitalists, tech moguls, and generational wealth. Today's gathering celebrated Madison Whitmore's birthday, daughter of Richard Whitmore, the real estate magnate, and she presided over it like royalty surveying her domain. Madison was stunning in the way a Venus flytrap is beautiful, perfectly formed, brilliantly colored, and lethal on contact. She moved through her party not as a host welcoming guests, but as a predator marking territory. Her eyes, an icy shade of gray, scanned the crowd, and when they found Rachel, they sharpened with familiar disdain. This wasn't Rachel's first Whitmore event. She'd learned to anticipate Madison's particular flavor of malice. It was never blatant enough to complain about formally, but always calculated to wound. A forgotten please, a disparaging remark about the servers being incompetent, a glass placed precariously at the edge of a surface, daring gravity to do its work. Today, Madison seemed especially emboldened, her boyfriend Blake Henderson at her side. Blake embodied inherited advantage, a physique sculpted by private trainers, a face that had never known genuine struggle, and a swagger that had never been challenged. He moved with his arm possessively around Madison's waist, radiating unearned confidence. "Look, Blake," Madison announced, her voice pitched to carry to the nearby guests as Rachel approached with her tray. "It's our little artist." She pronounced the word with exaggerated pretension. Rachel's stomach clenched. Several months earlier, at a smaller gallery event she'd worked, a respected art critic had shown unexpected interest in a charcoal sketch Rachel had created for the event's display. He'd spoken with her for several minutes, his compliments audible to surrounding guests, including Madison. That brief moment of recognition had been intoxicating for Rachel, but it had also painted a target on her back. To Madison, Rachel wasn't a person with aspirations. She was staff who had momentarily forgotten her place. Rachel maintained a neutral expression. "Champagne?" she asked, her voice steady. Blake smirked, taking 2 glasses. "You know, I've been thinking," he said, looking at Rachel but addressing Madison. "Maybe we should commission her for the guest house. She could do some abstract." The surrounding group chuckled. Rachel felt heat creeping up her neck, but she swallowed the anger. Reacting would only empower them. She gave a tight, professional nod and started to turn away. "Where do you think you're going?" Madison's voice cut through the air. "We're not finished." Rachel froze. She could sense the nearby guests turning toward the developing spectacle like audiences at a gladiatorial match. Her supervisor, Marcus, a perpetually anxious man in his 40s, was across the pool deck, deliberately averting his gaze. He understood as well as she did that the Whitmores were a major account. Complaints meant unemployment. "I have other guests to serve, Miss Whitmore," Rachel said, keeping her eyes focused just above Madison's shoulder. "But we're the most important guests," Blake slurred slightly, alcohol amplifying his bravado. He stepped closer, invading her space. "Madison asked you something." The air grew thick with tension. Rachel's pulse hammered in her ears. She felt cornered, the shimmering pool on one side, a wall of entitled faces on the other. All she wanted was to finish this shift, go home, and lose herself in the familiar sanctuary of her easel and paints. But it was becoming clear they had no intention of letting her leave gracefully. From a shaded wicker chair beneath a towering palm, an elderly man observed the unfolding scene. He wore simple linen pants and a crisp white shirt, appearing more like a retired professor than a guest at this lavish affair. He held a single glass of iced tea, his weathered face betraying decades of careful observation. No one paid him any attention. He was simply part of the decor. But his eyes, a penetrating shade of steel blue, missed nothing. He watched the calculated cruelty of the young woman, the brutish arrogance of her boyfriend, and the quiet, simmering dignity of the server. He didn't move. He simply watched and waited. The laughter from the surrounding crowd fueled Madison and Blake like oxygen on a fire. It was an intoxicating sound for them, audible validation of their social dominance in this sun-drenched hierarchy. For Rachel, it was a suffocating weight. Every giggle, every snicker reinforced her powerlessness. "I believe I asked what you thought of Blake's generous offer," Madison pressed, her lips curling into a satisfied smile. She took a step forward, her designer sandal clicking impatiently on the stone. "To paint the guest house. Surely an aspiring artist like yourself would jump at the opportunity to work on a Whitmore estate. It would be wonderful for your, what do you call it? Your portfolio." The word portfolio dripped with such venomous sarcasm it felt like a physical blow. Rachel understood what they wanted. They wanted tears, a panicked response, anything that would confirm their superiority. She drew a slow, steadying breath, the chlorine smell sharp in her nostrils. "I appreciate the thought," Rachel said, her voice miraculously controlled. "But I'm not taking commissions right now, if you'll excuse me." She attempted to step around them, her tray held like a shield. But Blake, emboldened and irritated by her composure, shifted to block her path. He towered over her, broader and taller, using his physical presence to intimidate. He leaned in close enough that she could smell the champagne on his breath. "Not so fast," he drawled, a cruel grin spreading across his face. "You know you look overheated. All that running around serving your betters must be exhausting." He glanced at Madison, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. It was the signal, the permission, the unspoken command. The circle of spectators leaned in, phones subtly rising as if capturing a rare wildlife sighting. This was the entertainment they'd been anticipating. "You should cool down," Blake said, his grin widening. Then it happened. It wasn't an aggressive, violent shove. It was casual, almost lazy, a slight push against her shoulder, but it was perfectly timed, perfectly angled. Rachel was off balance, her work shoes finding no traction on the slick stone. The tray of empty glasses flew from her hands, a brief, chaotic spray of crystal before it shattered across the patio. Rachel's arms flailed desperately, reaching for something, anything to grab onto. Then she fell backward into the pool. The shock of the cold water was violent. It stole her breath, flooded her ears, and plastered her uniform to her skin. For a heartbeat there was silence, the world a distorted, wavering blue. Then the laughter erupted. It wasn't gentle amusement. It was a roaring, braying tidal wave of ridicule that crashed over her. Even as she kicked to the surface, gasping and sputtering, hair in her eyes, chlorine burning her throat, she looked toward the pool's edge and saw a gallery of laughing faces. Blake was doubled over, howling. Madison stood with her arms crossed, a look of supreme satisfaction on her face as though she just executed a masterful strategy. People were pointing. Some were filming, phones held high. Humiliation, cold and sharp, cut through the shock of the water. It was worse than the fall, worse than the cold. It was the feeling of being reduced to an object of sport, a spectacle for the bored and privileged. Her cheap work clothes felt heavy, dragging her down, a physical manifestation of her social position. She swam toward the edge, her movements clumsy, her dignity stripped away with every stroke. Her supervisor, Marcus, finally rushed over, his face a mixture of panic and appeasement. "Miss Whitmore, Mr. Henderson, an accident, I'm certain," he chirped, avoiding eye contact with the soaked and shivering Rachel. "Of course it was an accident," Madison said sweetly, her eyes glittering with malice. "The girl is clumsy. She probably can't walk and carry a tray simultaneously. You really should hire more competent help, Marcus." Marcus wrung his hands. "Yes, Miss Whitmore, absolutely. My deepest apologies." He shot an angry, terrified glare at Rachel as though she were at fault. Rachel's hands finally grasped the rough edge of the pool. She hauled herself out, water streaming from her clothes and forming a dark puddle on the pristine stone. She didn't look at Marcus. She didn't look at the laughing crowd. She looked directly at Madison and Blake. Her hair dripped into her eyes, her mascara probably running, her body trembling uncontrollably. But for the first time that day, she let the fire inside her show in her gaze. She didn't speak. The silence of her stare carried more weight than any curse she could have uttered. Blake's laughter faltered momentarily under the intensity of her glare. Madison, however, remained unmoved. "What are you staring at?" she snapped. "Go, get out of here, you're dripping everywhere." Rachel pushed a wet strand of hair from her face. She felt a strange calm settle over her. The worst had happened. She'd been publicly humiliated. There was nothing more they could do to her. With as much dignity as she could gather, she turned her back on them and began the long, lonely walk across the patio toward the service entrance, leaving a trail of water and shattered pride behind her. The laughter followed her, a cruel soundtrack to her shame, but the laughter was beginning to fade. A new silence was spreading from one corner of the party, a silence heavy and unsettling. The elderly man in the linen shirt had risen from his chair. He hadn't spoken. He had simply stood, but his presence, once invisible, now seemed to command the entire space. He watched Rachel's retreating, drenched figure with an unreadable expression. Then his cold, steel-blue eyes slowly swept across the crowd, landing first on the catering supervisor, then on the laughing guests, and finally settling on Madison and Blake. The party wasn't over, it was just beginning. The shift in atmosphere was tangible. It began as a subtle pressure change, the way the air feels just before lightning strikes. The raucous laughter first diminished to nervous chuckles, then to complete silence as more and more people noticed the man now standing near the center of the patio. He wasn't physically imposing or loud, yet he radiated an undeniable authority that rippled through the crowd of privileged heirs and heiresses. He was Henry Blackwell, a name that, had they known it, would have sent a jolt of pure terror through every guest, especially through the Whitmore and Henderson families. But they didn't know. To them, he was just some nameless old man ruining their fun. Blake was the first to break the uneasy silence. "Hey, old-timer, the party's that way," he said with a dismissive wave. "Don't get confused, Grandpa." Henry Blackwell's gaze remained fixed on him, his expression unchanged. He didn't take the bait. Instead, he took a slow, deliberate step forward. He seemed to absorb the entire scene, the broken glass from Rachel's tray glinting on the stone, the dark trail of water leading to the service door, the smug expression on Madison's face, and the cowardly posture of Marcus, the catering supervisor. Marcus, sensing a new center of power and potential trouble, hurried forward. "Sir, is something wrong? Can I get you another drink?" he asked, trying to redirect the old man's attention and restore the party's shallow merriment. Henry Blackwell finally spoke. His voice wasn't loud, but it was deep and resonant, cutting through the air with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. It was a voice accustomed to being obeyed without question. "A problem," he repeated, his eyes still locked on Blake. "Yes, I believe there is. Tell me, young man," he said, his gaze flicking to Blake's designer polo, "what is your name?" Blake puffed out his chest, misinterpreting the question as deference. "Blake Henderson. My father is Thomas Henderson," he said, dropping the name like a royal decree, expecting it to impress. It did, but not in the way he hoped. A flicker of something, recognition, perhaps disappointment, crossed Henry's face. "Thomas Henderson," he murmured, almost to himself. "A dedicated man, works tirelessly. I wonder what he would think of his son's character." Blake's smirk wavered. "What's that supposed to mean? Who are you anyway?" Madison, sensing control slipping away, stepped forward. "This is a private party," she announced, her voice sharp with indignation. "I think you need to leave." Henry Blackwell turned his penetrating blue eyes on her. "This is a private party," he agreed softly, "but I'm afraid you're mistaken about whose." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. A chilling realization began to dawn on the faces of the older, more attuned guests. The simple linen shirt, the unassuming demeanor, it wasn't the appearance of a crasher. It was the look of someone so powerful he didn't need to advertise it. Henry's gaze swept over the silent crowd. "My name is Henry Blackwell," he said, his voice remaining level, "and this is my home." The name struck the crowd like a physical force. Henry Blackwell, not just a millionaire but a titan. The founder and CEO of Blackwell Enterprises, a sprawling global empire spanning technology, finance, and real estate. He was a legend, notoriously private, a man who hadn't been photographed publicly in over a decade. The Whitmores didn't merely have a business relationship with Blackwell Enterprises. Their entire real estate development operation was heavily leveraged with financing from one of Blackwell's subsidiary banks. Thomas Henderson wasn't just an employee. He was the executive vice president of Blackwell Enterprises' Western Division. The silence was now absolute, broken only by the gentle lapping of water in the pool. Blake's face drained from tan to a sickly, ashen white. The blood left his face so quickly he looked like he might collapse. Madison appeared frozen, her mouth slightly open, her cold gray eyes wide with dawning horror. "I lent my estate to my nephew for his charity fundraiser," Henry continued, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "I was told it would be a gathering of respectable young people. I see now I was gravely misinformed." He took another step, closing the distance until he stood directly in front of Blake and Madison. They both flinched as though he'd brandished a weapon. "You," he said to Madison, "find entertainment in tormenting a young woman working hard to earn a living. You, who have never worked a single day in your life. You believe your father's name grants you the right to be cruel." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "Let me assure you, it does not." He then turned to Blake. "And you physically assaulted her. You find amusement in humiliation. You hide behind your father's name, behind Thomas's name as a shield." Henry's eyes narrowed. "Let's see how strong that shield truly is." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple, old-fashioned mobile phone. With his thumb, he scrolled through contacts and pressed a button. He held the phone to his ear, his gaze never leaving Blake's terrified face. The entire party stood frozen, listening. "Thomas," Henry Blackwell said into the phone, his voice calm and clear. "Henry Blackwell here, I'm at my estate. Your son Blake is here as well. Yes, he's standing right in front of me. There was a pause. The entire world seemed to contract to the space between Henry's mouth and the phone. Thomas, I must be frank. I've just witnessed your son, encouraged by his girlfriend, physically assault a member of the catering staff for his own amusement. He pushed her into my pool in front of 50 people. No, I am not mistaken. Blake began to tremble. A low, guttural sound of pure panic escaped his throat. Character is everything, Thomas. You know I believe that. It is the foundation upon which we build everything else, Henry continued, his voice hardening. And what I have witnessed today is a catastrophic failure of character. It speaks to his upbringing, to the values he holds, and it makes me question the judgment of those I place in positions of leadership. He paused again, a silence that stretched into eternity. I think it's time you took a well-deserved retirement, Thomas, a permanent one. We'll have HR contact you Monday morning to discuss severance terms. I am deeply, profoundly disappointed. He ended the call without waiting for a response and slipped the phone back into his pocket. The sound of Blake's world imploding was a ragged, desperate gasp. His father, his powerful, untouchable father, had just been terminated in a 30-second phone call because of him. Henry Blackwell then turned his attention to the catering supervisor, Marcus, who was now sweating profusely, his face the color of chalk. You stood by and did nothing. You valued a client's money over your employee's dignity. You are a coward. Pack your things. Your company's contract with all Blackwell properties is terminated effective immediately. Marcus's legs gave out, and he sank to his knees. Finally, Henry Blackwell's gaze swept across the silent, horrified faces of the guests. The party is over, he announced, his voice echoing in the stunned silence. All of you, leave now. There was no argument. There was only a frantic, silent scramble as $100 million worth of privilege and entitlement fled the scene, their laughter replaced by the sound of their own panicked footsteps. Within minutes, the magnificent patio was empty, save for one trembling young man, one frozen young woman, a kneeling supervisor, and the quiet old man who had, in the span of 5 minutes, dismantled their entire world. The silence that settled over the patio was heavier than the noise that preceded it. The half-eaten hors d'oeuvres, the abandoned cocktails, and the glittering shards of broken glass were the only evidence of the party that had been. Blake Henderson was still standing, but he was a hollow shell, his eyes vacant and lifeless. He looked at Madison not with affection, but with dawning, venomous resentment. This was her fault. Her goading, her arrogance had led to this. Madison, for her part, seemed unable to process the magnitude of the catastrophe. Her family's financial stability was intricately connected to her father's ability to secure deals and financing, much of which depended on the goodwill of the financial network that Henry Blackwell commanded. Mr. Blackwell hadn't even needed to call her father. The social and financial fallout from this incident would be swift and devastating. The Whitmores would become pariahs. Get him off my property, Henry said, his voice quiet but firm, nodding toward Blake. He then looked at Madison. You go home and tell your father what you've done. Tell him to expect a call from his bank Monday morning. It was a simple statement delivered without malice, but it was a death sentence to their social and financial standing. Madison's face, for the first time, crumpled. The mask of cruel confidence shattered, revealing a terrified young woman. Without a word, she turned and fled, not with grace, but in a clumsy, panicked run. Blake stumbled after her, the two united only in their shared ruin. Marcus, the catering supervisor, was still on his knees, mumbling apologies to the stone floor. Henry gave him a look of profound distaste. Stand up, clean up this mess, send me a final invoice, then leave and never return. Having passed his judgment, Henry Blackwell's entire demeanor softened. The formidable titan of industry receded, replaced by the quiet, observant man he had been before. He walked over to the service entrance, the one Rachel had disappeared through moments earlier, and pushed it open gently. He found her in the staff changing area, a small, sterile room that smelled of disinfectant. She had wrapped herself in a thin, scratchy towel provided by the company and was sitting on a bench, shivering, though more from shock than cold now. Her work bag sat at her feet, and she stared at the linoleum floor, her mind somewhere far away. She hadn't heard the drama unfold outside. The soundproofing of the main house was too effective. She only knew she'd been humiliated and would probably be fired. "Miss Bennet." Rachel's head snapped up. She was startled to see the elderly man from the party, the one who had been sitting quietly watching. Her first instinct was fear. Perhaps he was a friend of the Whitmores, here to reprimand her further. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I'll be out of your way in just a moment. I was just trying to—" "You have nothing to apologize for," Henry said gently. He held a thick plush bathrobe from the house, a deep navy blue that looked incredibly soft. "I brought you this. You must be freezing." He held it out to her. Rachel looked from the robe to his face, confused. His eyes held no judgment, only a quiet concern. Hesitantly, she took it. It was warm and heavy, a small act of kindness so unexpected it almost brought her to tears. "Thank you," she whispered, pulling it around her shoulders. "My name is Henry Blackwell," he said, taking a seat on the bench opposite her, maintaining a respectful distance. "This is my home, and I would like to offer you my most sincere apology for what happened out there. My hospitality was abused, and you were the victim of that abuse." Rachel stared at him, her mind struggling to connect the dots. Henry Blackwell, the reclusive billionaire. She had seen his picture once in a business magazine her economics professor had shown the class. The man in front of her was older, his face more weathered, but the piercing eyes were unmistakable. You're Mr. Blackwell," she stammered. "I am," he said with a small, sad smile. "And I am ashamed of my guests. Their behavior was reprehensible." A wave of conflicting emotions washed over Rachel, relief, confusion, and a surge of vindication. I saw you," she said. "You were watching." "Yes," Henry admitted. "I find you can learn a great deal about a person's character by watching how they behave when they think no one of consequence is looking. I watched Miss Whitmore and Mr. Henderson, and I watched you." He leaned forward slightly, his expression serious. "They showed me their arrogance and their cruelty, but you showed me something far more remarkable, dignity. You were outnumbered, humiliated, and assaulted, yet you pulled yourself from that pool and looked them in the eye. You didn't shrink. In that moment, soaked and shivering, you were more powerful than any of them." Rachel felt a flush creep up her neck, this time not from anger or shame, but from the weight of his unexpected praise. She had felt so small, so utterly defeated. To hear that someone had seen strength in her lowest moment was disarming. "I just wanted the shift to end," she confessed quietly. "I know," he said. "Can I ask what you do when you're not working events like this?" Hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence as he listened with genuine interest, Rachel told him. She told him about her cramped apartment, her canvases, the smell of oil paint that she loved more than anything. She told him about her dream of attending the Rhode Island School of Design, of wanting to create art that made people feel something, that told a story. She pulled out her phone and with trembling hands showed him pictures of her work. They were stunning, portraits that captured raw, fleeting emotion in a subject's eyes, landscapes moody and atmospheric with color and light, still lifes that made the mundane seem beautiful. Henry Blackwell, a man who sat on museum boards and owned works by Monet and Picasso, looked through the small phone gallery in silence. He wasn't just looking, he was seeing. He recognized the talent, but more than that, he recognized the soul behind it. "This is extraordinary work, Miss Bennet," he said, his voice filled with new respect. "Truly extraordinary." He fell silent for a moment, a thoughtful expression on his face. Rachel waited, her heart pounding. She thought he might offer her some money, a check to compensate for the ruined clothes and humiliation. It would be a generous gesture, and she would be grateful. But Henry Blackwell had something else in mind. What he was about to propose wasn't charity. It was an investment in the character he had just witnessed. "Miss Bennet," he began, his steel-blue eyes meeting hers, "a person's character is the only true currency they possess in this world. Wealth, status, power, it can all vanish in an instant, as several people discovered today. But character, forged in moments like the one you endured by that pool, is priceless." He stood. "I run an educational foundation, the Blackwell Foundation for the Arts and Humanities. One of its primary functions is to identify and sponsor gifted individuals who have the talent but not the means to pursue their dreams. It's for people with character." Rachel's breath caught. She didn't dare hope. "On Monday," Henry Blackwell said, "my foundation's director will call you. She will offer you a full 4-year scholarship to the Rhode Island School of Design, covering tuition, housing, and all your materials. We will also provide a monthly stipend so you never have to work another catering job again." He smiled. "Unless you want to." Tears, hot and unstoppable, finally welled in Rachel's eyes and spilled down her cheeks. They weren't tears of sadness or humiliation, but of overwhelming, earth-shattering gratitude. The dream she had fought for, sacrificed for, been humiliated for, it was being handed to her, not out of pity, but because a powerful man had looked past her uniform and seen her worth. "But that's not all," Henry added. "When you graduate, the foundation will sponsor your first solo gallery exhibition in a proper gallery. We'll handle the promotion, the venue, everything. All you have to do is the one thing you were born to do." He paused, his eyes twinkling. "You just have to paint." 2 years later, the air didn't smell of chlorine and condescension. It smelled of gallery white paint, fine wine, and success. The light wasn't the harsh, judgmental glare of the Palm Desert sun, but the soft, focused glow of track lighting, each beam aimed at a canvas bearing a piece of Rachel Bennett's soul. This was her night, the opening of her first solo exhibition, Portraits of Resilience, at a prestigious gallery in downtown Los Angeles. Rachel moved through the crowded room not as an invisible server, but as the celebrated artist at the center of it all. She wore a simple, elegant black dress, her hair styled artfully, her hands, though clean, bearing the faint, permanent stains of paint under her fingernails, a badge of honor. She radiated a quiet confidence forged not just in the art studio, but in the crucible of that day by the pool. The gallery buzzed. Critics whispered in corners, collectors with discreet checkbooks pointed at their favorite pieces, and friends from art school embraced her, their faces beaming with pride. Her paintings lined the walls, a testament to her journey. There were portraits of ordinary people captured with empathy that made them extraordinary. A weary-looking diner cook, his face a roadmap of long shifts, an elderly woman on a park bench, a universe of stories in her eyes. Each canvas was infused with a deep understanding of the dignity found in everyday life. In a quiet corner, away from the main crowd, stood Henry Blackwell. He looked much the same, dressed in an impeccably tailored but understated suit. He held a glass of sparkling water and watched Rachel with the proud, beaming face of a mentor or grandfather. He had been true to his word and more. His foundation had not only funded her education, but provided mentorship and connections that were invaluable. They had become unlikely friends, sharing lunches where they discussed art, philosophy, and the nature of character. "You did it," he said, his voice warm as she approached him. "We did it, Henry," she corrected with a smile. "Thank you for everything." "Nonsense," he waved dismissively. "I just opened a door. You were the one who had the courage and talent to walk through it and build something magnificent. Look at this." He gestured around the room. "You're telling stories that matter." A red "Sold" sticker was already next to the largest painting in the collection. It was a striking piece, different from the others. It depicted a woman, drenched and shivering, pulling herself from a shimmering blue pool. Her face was shadowed, but her form was illuminated by harsh, bright light. Her posture wasn't one of defeat but of defiance. The crowd in the background was a blur of indistinct, mocking shapes. The painting wasn't about the humiliation. It was about the moment of climbing out, of choosing to rise. It was titled The Ascent. "That one sold first," Henry remarked. "An anonymous buyer from New York paid double the asking price." Rachel nodded, a complicated emotion in her eyes. She had needed to paint it, to exorcise the memory and reclaim it as her own. As if on cue, a newspaper clipping on a nearby table caught her eye. It was from a society gossip column dated about 6 months after the incident. Someone had tucked it into a book. It detailed the swift and spectacular fall from grace of the Whitmore and Henderson families. Thomas Henderson never worked in high finance again. The scandal of being fired so publicly by Henry Blackwell made him untouchable. Blake, stripped of his father's name and fortune, had reportedly dropped out of college and drifted into obscurity. The Whitmores had fared even worse. Their over-leveraged company, unable to secure new credit after being blacklisted by the Blackwell financial network, had collapsed. They'd been forced to sell the Palm Desert estate, the source of their pride and the stage for Rachel's humiliation. The last anyone had heard, Madison was working as a sales associate at a mid-range boutique in the suburbs, a world away from the designer clothes and poolside parties she once ruled. Their downfall wasn't a dramatic bolt of lightning but a slow, quiet unraveling, a consequence of character as hollow as their boasts. Rachel felt no joy reading it, only a distant, quiet sadness for the waste of it all. Her success wasn't built on their failure. Her triumph wasn't their punishment. Her victory was that she was here in this gallery, surrounded by her art and people who valued her. They were simply gone. Her best revenge was the life she had built. A young woman, a student from RISD, approached Rachel nervously, her eyes wide with admiration. "Miss Bennett, your work is. It's the reason I started painting portraits. It's so honest. Can I ask what your inspiration is?" Rachel looked past the student, her gaze meeting Henry's across the room. He gave her a slight, encouraging nod. She turned back to the young woman, a genuine, warm smile on her face. "My inspiration," Rachel said, her voice clear and strong. "I find it in dignity, in the strength people show when they think no one is watching, in the quiet, everyday moments of courage. That's where the real art is." She had transformed the ugliest moment of her life into the foundation of her beautiful future, not by seeking revenge, but by embracing the very quality her tormentors had tried and failed to strip from her. And on the walls of the gallery, the truth shone brighter than any desert sun. 5 years had passed since the night of Rachel's first gallery opening. The art world, once an impenetrable fortress, had become her home. She was no longer just Rachel Bennett, the promising emerging artist. She was Professor Bennett at the Rhode Island School of Design, the very institution she once dreamed of attending. She guided young, hungry artists, seeing her own past desperation and hope reflected in their eyes. Her own work had evolved, growing richer and more complex, and she was preparing for a major retrospective at a museum in San Francisco. Success hadn't made her complacent. It had made her more grateful, more acutely aware of the slender, unlikely thread of fate that had led her here. Her life had found a comfortable rhythm, quiet mornings with coffee and a sketchbook, afternoons filled with the vibrant chaos of the teaching studio, and evenings spent before a canvas, her truest confidant. The memory of the pool, of the laughter, of the soul-crushing humiliation had faded. It was no longer a raw wound but a silvery scar, a part of her history that had forged her but no longer defined her. Henry Blackwell remained her steadfast friend and mentor, their conversations a grounding force in her life. He was older now, more fragile, but his mind and spirit remained sharp. On a cool, foggy Tuesday afternoon, Rachel was tucked into a worn leather armchair at the Ink Well, a beloved independent bookstore and cafe in a quiet neighborhood. The air smelled of old paper and roasting coffee beans. It was her sanctuary, a place where she could sketch the world anonymously. She was working on a series of studies of hands. The gnarled hands of an elderly man reading a newspaper, the delicate hands of a woman cradling a mug, the restless hands of a student highlighting a textbook. A shadow fell over her sketchbook. "Excuse me," a quiet voice said. "Are you Rachel Bennett?" Rachel looked up, a polite, practiced smile ready for a fan or a student. The smile froze on her lips. The woman standing before her was both a stranger and a ghost. The face was thinner, etched with fine lines of weariness around the eyes and mouth that hadn't been there before. The once-icy gray eyes were now muted, clouded with an unfamiliar emotion that looked like apprehension. Her hair was a simple, unadorned brown, pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wore a simple gray sweater and jeans. There was no designer logo in sight. But it was her. It was Madison Whitmore. Rachel's heart gave a single hard thud against her ribs. The cafe, with its comforting smells and quiet hum, suddenly felt airless. The pencil felt slippery in her hand. For a moment she was 22 again, shivering and drenched, the sound of cruel laughter roaring in her ears. "Yes," Rachel managed, her voice tighter than she intended. Madison flinched at her tone, seeming to shrink. I know this is incredibly forward. I'm sorry to interrupt. I saw you through the window. I live a few blocks from here." She wrung her hands, a nervous gesture so alien on the woman Rachel remembered. "My name is Madison." She didn't offer her last name as if it were a thing of shame. "I know who you are," Rachel said flatly. She made no move to invite Madison to sit. An awkward, heavy silence stretched between them. The cafe patrons around them remained oblivious, lost in their own worlds. "I don't expect you to talk to me," Madison said, her voice barely a whisper. "I just wanted to say, I've followed your career. Your work is incredible, it's beautiful." The compliment coming from these lips was so jarring Rachel didn't know how to respond. She simply stared, her artist's eye taking in the details of this new Madison. The arrogant queen of Palm Desert was gone, replaced by someone who looked haunted. "Why are you here, Madison?" Rachel asked, her voice softening just a fraction. Madison took a deep breath as if steeling herself. "There's something I have to tell you, something I need to confess." She glanced at the empty chair opposite Rachel. "May I, please? It will only take a minute." Hesitantly, Rachel gave a curt nod. Madison sat down gingerly on the edge of the seat, as if she didn't deserve the comfort. "After that day at the party," she began, her eyes fixed on the tabletop, "everything fell apart. Everything Henry Blackwell said would happen happened. My father's business collapsed. We lost the house. We lost everything. My friends, they disappeared overnight." She gave a short, bitter laugh that held no humor. "Turns out their loyalty was mortgaged too." Rachel listened, her expression unreadable. She felt no satisfaction, no schadenfreude, only a strange emptiness in hearing the clinical summary of a life's destruction. "I had to get a job," Madison continued. "A real job. I started as a stockroom clerk at a department store, $12 an hour. My hands got calluses. My feet ached at the end of every day. For the first time in my life, I knew what it felt like to be tired, not bored, but truly bone-deep exhausted. For the first time, I knew what it felt like to be invisible, to be looked through by customers, to be treated like furniture." She looked up, and for the first time, Rachel saw a glimmer of genuine, painful self-awareness in her eyes. "And all I could think about was you. I thought about how you carried that tray, how you served us with professionalism I'd never known. You were tired too, but you had a grace I couldn't comprehend. I had mocked you for having a dream while I had nothing but my father's money." "About 2 years ago," Madison said, her voice dropping lower, "I was in a better place. I'd worked my way up to an office manager position. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I earned it. And I heard about your first exhibition. I read a review online and it mentioned a particular painting." Rachel knew which one, The Ascent. Madison nodded, a tear finally escaping and tracing a path down her cheek. "I had to see it. I flew to LA for one day and went to the gallery. I stood in front of that painting for an hour. You captured it perfectly, not my cruelty, not the laughter, but your strength. The moment you chose to pull yourself out. In that painting, you weren't a victim. You were a survivor. A cold realization began to dawn on Rachel. The anonymous buyer, she breathed. From New York, that was you. Yes, Madison whispered, her shame palpable. I used almost all my savings. I had to own it. At first, I think it was a form of self-punishment. I hung it in my small apartment, and every day it was the first thing I saw when I woke up and the last thing I saw before I slept. It was a reminder of the horrible person I was. But over time, it changed. She looked directly at Rachel now, her gaze pleading. It stopped being about my shame and started being about your resilience. It reminded me that even after a fall, you can choose to climb. It inspired me to be better, to be kinder. I started volunteering. I went back to school at night. That painting, it didn't just document the end of my old life. It became the cornerstone of my new one. She reached into her purse and pulled out a large sealed envelope. She pushed it across the table. It belongs to you, Madison said. It's the deed of ownership and the gallery receipt. I can't keep it. It feels stolen. Please take it back. I don't deserve to own a piece of your story. Rachel stared at the envelope, then at the woman before her. The years of resentment, the phantom sting of humiliation, it all seemed to dissolve in the face of this raw, painful confession. Forgiveness wasn't a transaction, and this wasn't about absolution. It was about recognizing a shared, flawed humanity. Slowly, Rachel pushed the envelope back across the table. No, she said softly. Madison looked up, confused. You bought it, Madison, Rachel said, her voice gentle but firm. It's yours. What you did that day was wrong. It hurt me deeply. But the person you are today, that person isn't the same girl by the pool. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Maybe you should keep it, not as a reminder of what you did to me, but as a reminder of what you did for yourself afterward. You climbed out of your own pool. The painting isn't about me anymore. It's about you too. For the second time that afternoon, Madison Whitmore began to cry. But this time, the tears weren't of shame or regret. They were tears of release. A weight she had carried for nearly a decade finally lifted, not by a formal "I forgive you," but by a profound act of grace. Thank you, Madison choked out. Thank you, Rachel. She stood, gathered what little remained of her composure, and walked out of the cafe, leaving Rachel alone with her sketchbook and the lingering echoes of a past that had finally been laid to rest. Rachel picked up her pencil, her hand steady, and on a fresh page, she began to sketch the hands of the woman who had just left, hands that were no longer clenched in arrogance, but open in a gesture of profound and unexpected redemption. Rachel's story is a powerful reminder that true worth isn't measured by the clothes you wear, the house you own, or the name you carry. It's measured by your character, your resilience, and the dignity you hold onto when the world tries to take it away. While Madison and Blake's laughter echoed for only a moment, the ripples of their cruelty destroyed their own gilded world. In contrast, Rachel's quiet strength, noticed by one discerning eye, became the catalyst for a future she had only dreamed of. Her story shows us that kindness is a form of power, and integrity is an investment that yields the greatest returns. If Rachel's story of resilience and unexpected justice moved you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who might need a reminder that character is everything. And don't forget to subscribe.